My name is Clara Voss. I was 36 on the morning I stepped into family court, expecting the town to watch my life get stripped down to nothing. My husband wanted our home. He wanted a claim on the firm I had built before he ever proposed. He wanted our 2 children to live mostly with him, though he had never once known which allergy medicine belonged to which child. And his mother had spent 10 weeks in church kitchens and grocery aisles explaining that I was selfish, icy, and rich enough to ruin a decent man for sport. People believed her because it was easier than asking me. Then, right before the courtroom doors opened, my mother bent toward my ear and whispered 3 words that made my knees go still. Let her take it. 4 months later, every Pierce in that room understood what they had accepted. Welcome back to Quiet Storm Tales, where we tell the kind of stories that do not begin with screaming and do not end with anybody keying a car. These are stories about ordinary women who keep their backs straight while the people closest to them mistake silence for weakness. If that is what you came here to hear, settle in. This one took me a long time to be able to say out loud. I started my bookkeeping firm on a card table beside a stack of paint cans in my brother's old shed. That was 11 years before the hearing, before Nolan, before Leela and Finn, before anyone in Brookhaven, Kentucky, thought of me as a woman with anything worth taking. I had one client then, a repair shop whose owner kept receipts in coffee tins, and a used calculator with a sticky 2 key. From that came a hardware store, then a bakery, then a dentist, then half the small businesses in town who brought me shoeboxes, bank envelopes, and the kind of fear people get when the tax office sends a letter. By 31, Voss Ledger Services had 2 rooms above a pharmacy, a lease in my own name, and my surname painted on the frosted glass. I still carried the first brass office key. It had been rubbed smooth from years of opening up before sunrise, back when 6:30 felt late to me. Everyone in town thought they knew my finances. They were wrong. They saw steady work, a downtown office, and a father who had been respected for keeping clean books. So they imagined hidden piles of cash. They did not see the unpaid hours I gave clients who were one wrong form away from closing. They did not see how often I corrected messes for free because I could not watch a family business collapse over a preventable mistake. That was the pattern of my life. I was the reliable woman. The one who noticed the missing invoice before a bank froze an account. The friend who loaned quietly and never mentioned it again. The wife who managed the house, the accounts, the children, the calendar, and the emotional weather without ever sending anyone a bill for it. I called that strength. It took a divorce petition and a husband with another woman to teach me that people will use your strength as evidence that you do not need protection. Nolan Pierce had a kind of charm that belonged on showroom floors. He could lean over a counter, smile like he had known you forever, and make you feel chosen for exactly 9 minutes. Then he could leave the room and forget what you had told him. I married him when I was 25. He sold commercial pumps and generators over 4 counties, and for several years we were fine in the way many couples are fine. Not perfect, not empty, still possible. The break began 2 years before he filed. Nolan had poured our savings, and more borrowed money than he admitted at first, into a deal with an old college friend. They were going to refurbish industrial units and resell them. The friend vanished before the second delivery ever existed. Nolan came home pale and shaky, sat at our kitchen table, and told me the debt was going to hit his credit, his commissions, and maybe his job. So I fixed it. I moved money through the legal channels I could, used business cash flow carefully, and covered the emergency before anyone outside our house knew. I did not do it to shame him. I did not even expect thanks. I thought saving his name would save us both. Instead, something bitter took root in him. A certain sort of man can survive failure. What he cannot bear is being rescued by his wife. After that, his jokes grew teeth. Must be relaxing to know everything, he would say. Or good thing the genius is here. I would smile, touch his arm, and pretend I did not hear the bruise underneath. Somewhere inside his embarrassment, he decided that my competence was control. My spreadsheets became chains. My caution became criticism. He never thanked me for keeping his disaster quiet. He only began counting reasons to resent me. I did not know about the affair then. But when I look back, the marriage ended the night I paid the debt. We simply kept living inside the paperwork for another 2 years. The clues were small because betrayal usually dresses itself in ordinary clothes. Meetings ran late. A new aftershave sat in the bathroom, one I had never bought. His phone turned face down as if it had learned shame. It buzzed beside the bed at strange hours, and he would reach for it before he reached for me. I need to say this clearly. I did not hack his accounts. I did not follow him. I did not plant a recorder or sit in the dark reading messages. I have spent my adult life handling other people's private numbers. I know the difference between noticing and violating. So I noticed. That was all. The way you notice damp plaster long before you find the leak. The woman who kept appearing was Marissa Vale. She had been the agent who sold us the house on Willow Lane. Polished, narrow-eyed, pretty in a way that looked assembled. Suddenly she was at the same charity luncheon, the same gas station, the same coffee counter where Nolan bought his morning cup. I told myself Brookhaven was small. I told myself my mind was tired. Then one Thursday evening, Nolan left his phone on the island while he showered. The screen flashed before I could turn away. It was not a love message. That was what made my throat close. It said, find out what her father left her. Not I miss you. Not anything tender. A question about my inheritance from a woman who had stood in my hallway and complimented the fireplace. I stood barefoot in my kitchen and understood that whatever Nolan and Marissa were doing, it had stopped being only an affair. They were planning. They were calculating my father's estate, my home, my firm, my life, while I was still trying to believe my marriage could be repaired. They had started adding columns. So did I hear is what they thought was on the table. The house on Willow Lane, where Leela learned to walk and Finn once hid a loose tooth under my keyboard because he wanted me to invoice the ferry. The firm with my name on the glass, the only thing I had created entirely by myself. My reputation in a town where the woman slicing your deli meat might also sit behind you in church. And the trust of 2 children, 10 and 6, who still believed their parents belonged on the same side. Those were the true assets. They cannot be measured in a settlement sheet. There was also the thing nobody but me understood yet. When my father, Arthur Voss, died 6 years earlier, he left me money. Not wealth that buys islands, but real money. About $210,000 and his interest in a narrow tract of land outside town. My father had been a bookkeeper before I was. In his 20s, a partner had cheated him badly enough that he spent the rest of his life treating documentation like a locked door. He taught me one rule before I was old enough to sign my first lease. Money remembers, he used to say. Help it remember. He meant do not blur what belongs to you with what belongs to someone else. Keep the origin clear. Write it down. Keep the proof where grief and pressure cannot erase it. So when his estate came to me, I did exactly what he would have wanted. One separate account. My name only, not a single marital deposit, not one joint withdrawal. Every transfer recorded in the green ledger he had given me when I was 17. His handwriting still filled the margins in hard square letters. Separate, traceable. For years, I followed that rule out of habit. I had no idea it would become the fence between me and ruin. Nolan did not tell me he wanted a divorce. His lawyer did. The envelope arrived at my office on a Wednesday afternoon. delivered by a man who had clearly been instructed to make sure everyone on the sidewalk saw him come in. I closed my door and read the petition at my desk. Nolan was not simply asking to end the marriage. He wanted the house. He wanted an equitable interest in Voss Ledger Services, legal wording that meant he wanted a piece of the firm he had entered only to borrow money or complain that I worked too much. And he wanted primary residential custody of Leela and Finn. His lawyer was Peter Pierce, his mother's nephew, which told me whose fingerprints were on the petition before I reached the second page. They demanded a formal valuation of my firm as a marital asset. I sat there with the paper in my hands and felt the room tilt sideways. Then I did what I do when numbers stop behaving. I called someone better than me. Nadia Mensah came recommended by a restaurant owner I had helped years earlier. She was a divorce attorney with a calm face and the driest voice I had ever heard. Within 15 minutes of sitting across from her, I had told her almost everything. Nolan's affair, the inheritance message, the business, the children, the house, the gossip that had already begun curling through town. She did not pat my hand. She did not promise victory. She asked one question. "Clara, did any part of your father's money ever touch a joint account?" The silence after it was long enough for me to understand she already saw the battlefield. "Never," I said. My father's voice seemed to stand behind me when I answered. The inheritance had remained separate from the first day. The land title had never changed. My firm had been organized as a single-member company before Nolan and I were engaged, with its own filings, tax returns, accounts, and books going back 11 years. Nadia set her pen down. "Then they are reaching for smoke," she said. "In this state, an inheritance that stays separate and can be traced remains separate. A premarital business can be protected too, if the records prove it was never mixed into the marriage." For half a second, my lungs opened. Then she leaned forward. "Listen carefully. Having the law on your side is not the same as having an easy fight. You will have to prove the path of every dollar. They are betting that somewhere in 11 years something got sloppy. While they hunt for that mistake, they will try to exhaust you. Motions, fees, delays, pressure." I nodded because I understood that kind of math. "And Brookhaven?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "A courtroom runs on evidence. A town runs on appetite." That was the true problem. The documents were strong. My father had made sure of that long before I understood why. But Elaine Pierce had already started holding court where no judge could correct her. Elaine did not have to shout. Women like her never do. She was 67, silver hair pinned neatly, casserole dish always ready, birthday cards always sent. In the church fellowship room, when Elaine lowered her voice, people considered it wisdom. I learned what she was saying the way women usually learn these things, from the gaps in conversation when I entered a room. She told people I controlled Nolan's spending. She said I hid money. She suggested he had been lonely for years with a wife who treated him more like an employee than a husband. She never said the word affair. Elaine was too skilled for that. She left the cruelest sentences half-built and let others finish them. Within 3 weeks, longtime clients looked away in the grocery store. A woman whose payroll mess I had cleaned up at midnight crossed the parking lot rather than greet me. Myrissa stopped pretending to be invisible. She came to football games beside Nolan, laughed at the farm's supply counter with her hand on his sleeve, and once sat 2 tables away from me at a diner, making sure everyone saw how comfortable she already was. She behaved like the next Mrs. Pierce before I had even become the former one. Like she was measuring the windows while I still paid the electric bill. The loneliest part was not that people believed lies. It was that they found the lies easy. For 11 years, I had been trusted with secrets, balances, passwords, and panic. Now that someone was trying to take from me, nobody saw a theft. They saw a capable woman and assumed she must be the dangerous one. That is something nobody warns you about. People struggle to picture a competent woman as wounded. They see her standing upright and decide she cannot be bleeding. Then Nalan brought the children into it, and whatever softness I had left for him burned away. He had never been the parent who remembered dental appointments or which child needed the nightlight. Suddenly he became a carnival version of a father. New scooter for Finn. A tablet for Leela. Promises of a swimming pool and a much nicer house, where maybe they would live most of the time. He did not tell them directly that I was the obstacle. He only left the shape of the idea for them to step into. I found out when Leela came home from school quiet, backpack still on, and asked in the careful voice children use when they have been handed adult fear, "Mom, are we going to have no money now?" I knelt on the kitchen tile so my eyes were level with hers. I did not cry. I did not criticize her father. Early on, I made myself a rule. My children would not hear me tear down half of themselves, no matter what that half did. But I made another promise, silently, right there. That night, I called Nadia and asked what it took to protect them properly. By morning, we requested a guardian ad litem, an independent person whose responsibility was the children's best interests, not Nalan's pride and not mine. I kept their school routine unchanged. Same dinners, same homework table, same soccer practices, same lamp glowing in the hall. Consistency is evidence, Nadia told me. While Nalan promised swimming pools, I offered pasta at 6 and pajamas by 8. It did not feel heroic. It felt like standing waist-deep in a river, gripping two small hands while someone downstream waved candy and told them to let go. At bedtime, Leela asked again, "We're still okay, aren't we?" I tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "We are," I said. For the first time in weeks, I forced myself to believe it. The autumn pantry supper was a Brookhaven institution. Folding tables, donated pies, raffle baskets, and the whole town crowded beneath the church basement ceiling. I almost stayed home. But hiding would have been received as confession, and I was done confessing to things I had not done. So I put on a simple charcoal dress, carried a paper plate, and made polite conversation while people watched me with the hungry discomfort of those who know they have repeated something they cannot prove. Elaine sat at the middle table like a queen at a harvest festival, Nalan beside her, Marissa brazenly only a few chairs away. I was pouring coffee when Elaine's voice carried, smooth and sweet enough to sound accidental. Someone had asked how I was managing, in the false concern tone people use when they want permission to enjoy bad news. Elaine smiled. "Oh, Clara always lands upright. Though by the end, she may be fortunate to keep the name she was born with." The table laughed. Not a vicious laugh exactly. Worse, comfortable. The kind that belongs to people who have already decided the target deserves it. I set the coffee urn back down, quietly. I did not turn. I did not give them a trembling voice, a red face, a scene to carry home and polish into evidence. I picked up my coat, walked through the basement door, crossed the cold lot, and got into my car. I did not cry. That shocked me more than anyone else. I sat in the dark with my hands on the steering wheel, and instead of breaking open, I dug through my purse, found a receipt and a pen, and began making a list. I am a bookkeeper. When my life collapses, I audit the wreckage. That list grew into the discovery that changed everything. I pulled the mortgage records for the house on Willow Lane, records I was legally entitled to because my name was on the loan. There I found that Nalan had refinanced 3 months before filing for divorce. He had opened a home equity line and taken nearly all the value we had built in the house. The money had not gone toward the children or repairs or a joint account. It had gone into a property resale venture. Marissa Vale was listed as a partner. Then came the worst part. To secure the business loan behind the venture, Nalan had signed a personal guarantee. His name, his obligation, the entire debt wrapped around him. He had used the house as part of the structure and then demanded that same house as if it were treasure. I sat under the green banker's lamp in my office and felt something return that was not happiness, not even anger. Clarity. When I first saw the refinance happening, I had called the lender, trying to stop what I could. But it was a marital home with a joint mortgage, and the rules were uglier than fairness. It took 2 signatures to block certain actions and only one spouse to borrow against the equity under the terms Nolan had used. There had been nothing I could do but record. So I recorded everything. Statements, transfers, loan dates, filing dates, the old-fashioned way, the way my father taught me. As the full picture formed, I realized Nolan had misunderstood his own arithmetic. He thought he was collecting assets, the house, the firm, the life he believed I had kept from him. What he had actually gathered were obligations. Debt with a roof over it, debt with his signature under it. Debt he was now fighting to be awarded. He had not read closely enough to know what he wanted. Peter Pierce made sure every step cost money. That is what lawyers do when the facts are not their friend. They cannot win clean, so they make standing upright expensive. He filed requests, then revised requests, then demanded another business valuation, and after that another set of records. He asked for temporary support from me to Nolan, as if the poor injured husband needed protection from the wealthy wife who had supposedly hidden everything. Each letter required a response. Each response cost money I would rather have spent on school shoes or groceries or therapy for my children once the smoke cleared. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table after midnight, the green ledger open beside invoices and legal bills, and wondered whether being right could cost more than losing. My father's handwriting sat in the margins, steady as a guardrail. Nadia kept me from drifting into panic. "We do not answer noise with noise," she told me more than once. "Paper beats volume every time." I repeated that when I opened the office, when I braided Leela's hair evenly though my hands wanted to tremble, when Finn asked if Dad's new friend was going to live in our house and I had to swallow before answering. I kept showing up. That is the part people do not see. Exhaustion can be silent. It can sit behind a calm face and still weigh as much as stone. And if you have ever been the woman everyone uses as their emergency plan, you know exactly what I mean. The dependable one, the fixer, the person people do not check on because they assume she came assembled that way. If that feels too familiar, just know I see you. The next morning, I drove to the bank and collected the proof that ended the case. There is a wide canyon between believing you are protected and being able to lay protection on a judge's desk. My father had spent my childhood teaching me that canyon existed. So I crossed it document by document. At the bank where my inheritance account had sat untouched for 6 years, I requested a certified transaction history with the institution's seal. It showed the estate deposits arriving and nothing marital ever entering or leaving. From there, I went to the office of my father's former attorney, who still had the probate file in storage. I ordered certified copies of the will, the distribution papers, and the deed for the land parcel. From my own locked cabinet, I pulled the formation documents for Voss Ledger Services, filed before Nolan and I married, plus 11 years of separate tax returns and account statements. I stacked everything into a folder so thick the clasp strained. Then I drove to my mother's house and spread it all across her kitchen table. My mother, Ruth, was 65, narrow-eyed, practical, and sharper than any courtroom knife. She looked at the documents, then at me. I opened the green ledger to the page where my father had written the original estate dates in his blocky hand. Beside them, in the margin, were the words he had left me like a command. Separate, traceable. The certified bank dates matched his notes exactly. The line ran clean from his estate, through the bank, into my name, never touching Nolan's. I had the whole chain, every date, every signature, every official mark proving that the inheritance and the company had not become marital property, not accidentally, not carelessly, not once. My mother rested her palm on the folder and stayed silent for a long moment. Then she said something I thought was comfort, but it was strategy. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop carrying what they insist belongs to them. I closed the folder. At the time, I did not understand. Not fully. A few days later, I ran into Marissa in the grocery store parking lot. Gray afternoon, wet pavement, both of us reaching toward the same cart return. There was no elegant escape. Up close, without Nolan or Elaine or an audience, she looked older than 48. Not in the skin, in the eyes. "You think I'm the monster," she said. I said nothing. She put a bag into her trunk, then spoke lower, almost as if the words had slipped out. "You don't know what it feels like to get close to 50 with nothing secure. Twice I left marriages with less than I was promised." For one brief second, I saw her. A woman who had counted on men and settlements and found them all less solid than advertised. A woman afraid of old age with no asset carrying her name. I had seen that panic in clients when the numbers stopped pretending. I understood fear. Then she lifted her chin and the mask came back. "The house is mostly settled already," she said, smiling without warmth. "Nolan says I can change the drapes first. I always hated the ones you picked." There it was. She had been inside my home, the place where my children had learned the shape of safety, and she was already sorting what to discard. Whatever pity I had felt folded itself into a small, hard square and went away. I did not hate her. Hate requires fuel, and I needed mine for the children. But I stopped mistaking her fear for innocence. People can be terrified and still choose cruelty. Marissa had chosen it with a clear head. That weekend, my mother told me the story behind my father's rule. We were washing dishes while Leela and Finn slept in the next room. She handed me a plate to dry and said, "Arthur was not always this careful, you know." Before my mother, my father had gone into a bookkeeping partnership with a man he trusted like blood. They used one account because they thought trust made paperwork insulting. They shook hands, they mixed funds, they believed friendship was protection. The friend emptied everything and disappeared. He didn't only lose the money, my mother said. He lost the ability to prove which money had ever been his. That nearly broke him worse. Afterward, he documented every dime. That was where the ledger came from. Not neatness, not obsession, a wound. He had been ruined by a handshake and spent the rest of his life teaching his daughter to survive signatures. I dried the plate slowly, thinking of all the times I had teased him for being fussy. My mother hung the towel over the oven handle and gave me the same level look my father used when numbers did not lie. "He had another saying," she said. "At cards, the person talking the loudest is usually the one holding nothing." I laughed then. A real laugh, quick and surprised. After 10 weeks of being out-talked by Elaine, Nolan, and Marissa, I was beginning to suspect my father had known exactly the kind of people who make the most noise. A week before the hearing, Nadia spread the case out on her desk like a map. "They are standing on 3 claims," she said. 1, that your firm is marital. 2, that your inheritance was mixed into the marriage. 3, that the house and household property should be divided as marital property. She tapped the file. "The first 2 collapse under the documents. The company is separate. The inheritance is traceable. On those we are strong. The third is different. The house, cars, furniture, joint accounts, those are marital. Nolan has the right to ask for them." "So we fight for the house," I said automatically. "We can," Nadia answered, "and possibly win some part of that fight." I looked at her and thought of the refinance records, the home equity line, the loan guarantee, the debt stacked under the roof like rot beneath a floorboard. "What is the house worth now?" I asked. "Not on paper from last year, now after what he borrowed." Nadia pulled out the appraisal, payoff statement, credit line balance, and loan documents. She ran the numbers. Then she went quiet. The equity was not small. It was gone, worse than gone. Once the obligations tied to Nolan's venture were counted, the marital property he wanted most had negative value. Somewhere in my mind, my mother's sentence returned: stop carrying what they insist belongs to them. For the first time, I understood the shape of it. The prize was not a prize, it was ballast. They had mistaken weight for wealth. I made Nadia go through the math again, then a third time. I mistrust numbers that feel like miracles. But there was no miracle, only consequences. The house on Willow Lane, after Nolan's refinance and the credit line feeding Marissa's resale plan, carried more obligation than value. Whoever took it would also take the mortgage, the credit line, and everything attached through his signature. And the firm. Nolan wanted half of Voss Ledger Services as if a bookkeeping practice were a truck you could cut in two and sell. Nadia pointed out what Peter had missed. The business is not a factory, Clara. It is not a warehouse. It is you. Clients stay because they trust you. Remove you, and the assets are desks, a lease, and old file cabinets. Even if a court had somehow treated part of the firm as marital, which our documents made unlikely, Nolan could not operate my trust. My clients would follow me across town before they let him touch their payroll. Sitting in Nadia's office, I watched their plan reveal itself in reverse. They had spent weeks attacking me for three things: the house, which had become a debt pit, the firm, which had little value without me, and the children whom the guardian was already seeing I parented in the daily, unglamorous ways that count. Nolan had aimed the whole fight at his own future. And the strangest thing was that I had not set a trap. I had not lied, hidden, staged, or plotted. They had built the trap themselves. I had simply kept copies. Truth did not free me immediately. That is too clean for real life. Brookhaven still had Elaine's version, and by repetition it had hardened into fact. I was the cold wife, the money hoarder, the woman who had pushed a charming husband toward comfort elsewhere. I heard through someone kind enough to be uncomfortable that Elaine repeated her line about my birth name at a women's circle and received another round of laughter. A friend from school, a woman whose failing cafe I had quietly kept open through 2 winters, stopped answering my calls. That hurt in a place I did not know had teeth. I could have fought gossip with documents. I could have carried the refinance papers into the church basement and shown every woman there the debt Elaine's son had created. Nadia advised against it. I agreed. Spend truth where it has power, she said, not where people came for entertainment. So I stayed silent. Silence chosen on purpose is not the same as silence forced down your throat, but it still hurt. It nearly broke when Leela came home one day and climbed onto the sofa with a solemn face. A girl in her class had said we were going to lose the house and sleep in our car. I held her and did not promise we would keep that house because by then I knew we would not. Instead, I knelt in front of her and gave the promise I could keep. We will always have a home, I said. I built one life from almost nothing. I can build another. She believed me. After that, I had no choice but to deserve it. In the week before court, Nadia and I built the file like a brick wall. Certified inheritance statements, probate documents, land deed, company formation papers dated before the marriage, 11 years of separate tax returns, mortgage papers, refinance records, the home equity line, Nolan's personal guarantee on the resale venture loan. Every page came from a bank, court archive, public record, tax filing, or joint account I had a right to access. No stolen messages. No secret recordings. No diary of suspicions. Only documents that clerks stamp and judges trust. My father's philosophy, stacked in manila folders. The day before the hearing, Nadia let me sit alone in the courtroom for a few minutes. She said familiarity could dull fear. The room was colder than I expected. The benches were hard and polished by years of nervous hands. An old heating pipe clicked behind the wall like something impatient. I listened to it and breathed until my pulse slowed. Then Nadia told me the plan in the plainest words. When they demand the house, do not fight. When they demand the marital property, let it go. Give them what they entered the room expecting to win. I must have stared at her as if she had lost her mind. She smiled faintly. The worst consequence we can deliver is success. I looked toward the empty judge's bench and felt a small pocket of calm open inside me. My mother had seen it first. Nadia had put law around it. They made one last attempt before the hearing, and it showed me exactly what they needed. Peter sent a settlement offer wrapped in fake generosity. If I would voluntarily put my firm into the marital estate for division, Nolan would consider easing off the support request. Maybe I could keep the older sedan. Maybe they would be reasonable. It looked like compromise. It was a snare. Voss Ledger Services was already protected. They could not drag it into the marital pile unless I handed it there myself. They did not need proof. They needed my signature. At the meeting, Peter slid the papers across the conference table and put on a voice he must have thought was soothing. As a sign of cooperation, Clara, perhaps you can turn over the office keys while valuation is pending. Out of habit, my fingers went to my purse. They closed around the brass key, the old one. Smooth from all those dark mornings when I opened the office before anyone else on the street had turned on a light. I laid my hand on the table. Then I stopped. I kept the key in my fist and drew my hand back. No, I said, nothing else. Peter's smile twitched. He had expected tears, anger, bargaining, not one quiet syllable. I left their unsigned papers on the table and walked out with the key in my pocket. By then, I knew who was bluffing. Their plan depended on me being exhausted enough to sign without reading. Unfortunately for them, they had chosen a bookkeeper. So I made the choice no one expected. I would not battle for the house. I would not claw over furniture, cars, appliances, or the visible markers of the marriage. They could have the entire bright heap, including every debt tucked underneath it. I would not surrender the firm. I would not pretend my father's money had ever belonged to anyone else. And I would fight for Leela and Finn with every breath I could gather. That was the line. Nadia approved. You relinquish the underwater marital property. You protect the separate assets. You focus custody on stability. It is surrender only to people who cannot read a balance sheet. I will not pretend courage felt clean. Deciding to sign away the house where your children lost teeth and learned to ride bikes is a strange kind of bravery. The night before court, I sat at my mother's kitchen table with the green ledger open to my father's handwriting. Separate, traceable. 2 words from a dead man who had once been ruined and decided his daughter would not be. I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and went to the kitchen. The children breathed softly down the hall. I rubbed the brass key on my ring and remembered Leela's question about living in the car. We will always have a home. I make numbers balance for a living. I had started once with a shed, a card table, and a calculator that skipped 2s. I could begin again. By sunrise, fear had not vanished, but it had company. Readiness stood beside it. I was not going to be louder than the Pierces. My father had warned me about the loudest person at the table. I was going to be quiet, prepared, and correct. I was going to carry a folder of certified truth and let them talk themselves into the hole they had spent 10 weeks digging. The courthouse hallway smelled of waxed floors and burnt coffee. The Pierces were already gathered, and they did not look anxious. They looked like people waiting for a prize drawing. Elaine sat upright in a wool coat, composed and pleased. Nolan stood with his hands in his pockets, trying to look solemn while failing to hide satisfaction. Marissa had actually come, which would have amazed me if I had still believed shame had any power over her. She leaned close to Nolan, murmured something behind her hand, and I caught the word drapes again. I almost laughed. Peter shuffled documents with the confident fussiness of a man who had mistaken paper volume for understanding. The heating pipe along the wall knocked and hissed. I sat on the cold bench and matched my breathing to the sound. Slow, even, again. My mother sat beside me and took my hand. Her palm was warm and dry. She leaned so close I felt her breath brush my hair. "Let her take it," she whispered. Those 3 words fixed me in place. Let Marissa take the house she had already decorated in her head. Let Elaine take the victory she had sold to town as justice. Let Nolan take the assets he had demanded. Let all of them carry what they had called treasure. It was not defeat. It was permission for gravity to work. The doors opened. The bailiff called our case. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked in to do exactly what my mother said. I let them take it. That was the first move, and it confused them because they had come armed for resistance. When the judge reached the issue of the marital residence, Peter began his prepared speech. Before he could build momentum, Nadia stood. "My client does not contest Mr. Pierce receiving the marital home," she said in a tone so neutral it almost sounded generous. "She is prepared to transfer her interest." Peter stopped in the middle of a sentence. Nolan looked over at Elaine. Elaine's mouth opened into the start of a smile. Then came the rest. The primary vehicle, Nolan could have it. The furnishings, his. Appliances, contents of the house, remaining joint account balance such as it was, his. Every visible thing they had paraded as proof of my greed I signed away calmly. Page by page, line by line. With each signature they relaxed more. Elaine actually patted Nolan's arm. Marissa sat straighter in the gallery, eyes bright, as if she were mentally choosing paint. They thought pressure had broken me. They thought the calculating wife had finally folded beneath the gossip, the fees, the public humiliation. I let my face remain still and gave them the picture they wanted, a defeated woman with a pen in her hand. The only thing I did not hand over was the firm. When Peter tried to slide Voss Ledger Services into the same list, Nadia produced the formation records, certified and dated before the marriage, along with the separate returns. The judge looked them over. There was very little to discuss. The company remained mine. Through it all, my left hand rested in my lap around the brass key, warm now from my grip. They could take the house they could see. They could not take the work that had made me. They signed in victory before the appraisal numbers were discussed. They accepted the home and attached obligations before the debt documents were read aloud. That was the plan. They walked into it smiling. Then Nadia rose to complete the financial record, and the air changed. She began with the inheritance. Certified bank history, 6 years of untouched separate funds, every dollar traceable to Arthur Voss's estate, no marital deposits, no joint withdrawals. She submitted the probate papers and deed. She explained calmly that the evidence met the burden for separate property. The judge reviewed the pages and nodded. My father's money remained mine. Next came the firm. Single-member company, created before the marriage, maintained with separate books and tax filings. Mine, Peter shifted. Not much. Enough. Then Nadia turned to the house on Willow Lane, the one Nolan had just accepted with such satisfaction. She entered the refinance, the home equity credit line, the current appraisal, the payoff amounts, and the venture loan documents. The numbers went into the record. The equity was gone. Then she submitted the final page. Nolan's personal guarantee for the loan tied to Marissa's property resale venture, secured by his own signature and entangled with the house he had insisted on taking. Nadia folded her hands. My client has no objection to Mr. Pierce assuming the marital residence along with its associated liabilities, she said. The silence was complete. I watched comprehension cross their faces one by one. Peter grabbed the appraisal first, scanning as if the page might rearrange itself out of courtesy. His confidence folded inward. Nolan leaned toward him, whispered something, then read enough for the blood to leave his face. He understood at last that the house he had demanded was not a nest egg. It was an anchor. The debt he had hidden inside it was now wrapped around him, secured by his own name, attached to a property worth less than the balance against it. He had won. Exactly. He had received the house, the visible assets, and the burden he had created. I sat with my hands folded. I did not need my voice. The documents were doing better work than outrage ever could. My mother's words had become legal reality. Let her take it. They had taken it eagerly, on the record, before reading what came with it. The judge looked over his glasses toward the Pierce side of the room. That was when Elaine began to unravel. I had never seen her lose control. Not in 67 years of pie plates, sympathy cards, and folded hands. But she was standing before the judge finished speaking, her church voice gone. What came out was sharp and ugly and loud enough for the back row. First, she turned on Peter. How had he missed this? What was she paying him for? Why had he let Nolan accept debt? Peter stammered about disclosures and timing, shuffling pages that could not save him. Then she turned on her son. The things she said to Nolan were harsher than anything she had said about me because they carried truth. He had been reckless. He had let that woman guide him. He had risked the family name. He had tied himself to a debt no Pierce could absorb. Nolan spun toward the gallery, looking for Marissa. She was already standing. The house she had wanted was underwater. The man she had planned to upgrade into security was attached to a guaranteed loan and collapsing credit. Marissa knew numbers well enough when they involved survival. She moved toward the doors with her face closed and did not look back. The judge struck the bench and demanded order. The bailiff stepped forward. The entire Pierce side of the room turned into the public spectacle Elaine had spent weeks insisting I would create. I remained still. Not noble, not saintly, just finished. When order returned, the judge addressed the children. The guardian ad litem's report was plain. One parent had maintained school, routine, appointments, meals, and emotional steadiness. The other had made large promises, traveled between houses, and introduced the children to his new partner before they understood the old family was ending. Primary custody went to me with scheduled visitation for Nolan. That was the moment my chest unlocked. Not when the house debt landed. Not when Elaine shouted. When Leela and Finn were safe. I had promised my daughter a home. Now I could build it. I had said almost nothing in that courtroom. I had not needed to. Everything important had been spoken years earlier by my father's pen in a green ledger. The loudest people at the table, as it turned out, had been holding the weakest hand. Marissa did not even make it fully across the courthouse steps before her arrangement with Nolan began dying. I saw them through the hallway windows while I gathered my folder. She had stopped him near the railing. He was talking fast. She was not listening. Her posture had already changed from lover to auditor. She had spent enough of her life distinguishing men with money from men wearing the costume of money. It took her less than a minute to see Nolan clearly. Then she walked to her car and left. Her fear, the one she had confessed in the grocery lot, had not been imaginary. She was terrified of reaching later life with nothing solid. But fear did not excuse helping another woman's home get dismantled. She had chosen what she chose. Now she could keep it. Elaine found me in the hallway after that. Somehow she had rebuilt the outer layer of herself. Her voice had gone soft again, though the edges showed. She wanted to speak privately. Perhaps, she said, there had been confusion. Perhaps a family arrangement could spare everyone difficulty. Surely I did not really expect Nolan to manage the house in its current state. Surely there was some way to revisit matters before things became unpleasant. I looked at the woman who had fed a town the story that I would be lucky to keep my own name. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the brass key. "No, Elaine," I said gently. "I am keeping what I made. You can keep what you claimed." Then I picked up the folder, took my mother's arm, and walked toward the doors while the old pipe behind us knocked like applause. My mother waited with me at the top of the courthouse steps in thin winter sunlight. We did not cheer. We did not collapse into movie tears. That has never been our family's language. She simply looked at me and gave one small nod that held more than a speech. I thought about my father then, about the handshake that had emptied his life when he was young, about the ledger he kept afterward like a prayer, every page saying his daughter would not lose what could be proven. I had followed his rule for years without needing it. That day, it stood around me like a house built long before I knew I would need shelter. Behind us, the Pierces were still arguing somewhere inside the marble hallway, their voices thinning each time the doors swung. Ahead of us, my children waited at my mother's house. The hall lamp would be on, dinner would happen, bedtime would happen. Life, which is stubborn, would keep expecting us. I walked into that courthouse prepared to give up everything people could point at. I walked out holding everything that had ever truly belonged to me. Consequences arrived the way they usually do. Slowly, then all at once. Within 9 months, Nolan could not keep up with the house on Willow Lane and the loan wrapped around it. The bank began proceedings. The place where my children had taken first steps and lost first teeth was listed in a short sale and bought by strangers for less than the debt against it. The personal guarantee followed Nolan into his credit, his work, and every future application where numbers asked what kind of man he had been with money. Myrissa's venture folded. The partnership dissolved. She had moved on before the paperwork cooled. Elaine discovered that Brookhaven did have a memory after all. Not immediate and not brave, but real. Once the facts leaked out in the dull, ordinary way facts do, casseroles came less often. The seat beside her at Women's Circle was not always filled. People who had laughed too comfortably became busy when she approached. Small towns may believe lies quickly, but eventually they enjoy a correction too. As for me, I kept the office with Voss on the door. Some clients who had drifted during the gossip returned, embarrassed and overly polite. I accepted them without making them confess. I had decided a grudge was just another kind of debt, and I was done carrying anything that did not belong to me. Before the year ended, I bought a smaller house on the north side of town. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with morning light, and a little fenced yard Finn immediately assigned to a future dog. I paid for it with my own money, separate and traceable. Leela chose pale green for her room. Finn put a cardboard sign on his door that said office, because apparently running a household had become contagious. Every night I left the hallway lamp on. For a long time, that small light felt like the truest proof I had kept my promise. People still ask about the divorce sometimes, carefully, as if touching a bruise they are not sure has faded. They ask whether I lost the house, the marriage, my standing. I tell them the truth, and I admit I enjoy the wording more than I should. I let her take everything. The house, the cars, the furniture she had already replaced in her imagination. The shiny pile she thought would make her secure. I signed it over with a steady hand. She simply did not understand the price tag. None of them did. My boundaries with the Pierces remain polite and firm. Nolan sees Leela and Finn according to the schedule. We discuss school, health, transportation, and nothing that requires memory or tenderness. We do not discuss drapes. Elaine once told a room of women that I might be lucky to leave with my birth name. I think about that sentence sometimes, mostly because of how wrong it turned out. Voss is still on the glass door above the pharmacy, brighter now because I had the lettering repainted. It is on my children's forms, on the deed to my own house, on the ledger my father placed in my hands when I was 17. I did not merely keep my name. I kept what the name had built, what it had protected, what it had taught me to document. The only lesson worth offering is this: leaving with fewer visible things does not mean leaving with less. Not if what remains is finally yours without dispute. That is my story. 3 words from my mother, a green ledger from my father, a courtroom full of people who fought hard enough to win a debt.